Hi, everyone. I'm going to take this mic so I'm not hovering over. I'm Marisa. I'm the Water Program Manager at the Hill Country Alliance, and I'm here to moderate this panel about drought and innovation. I think as most of you all know, we're in an exceptional drought across most of the Hill Country, which is as bad as it gets when it comes to the U.S. Drought Monitor's drought designations. And we can see the impacts of drought all over our landscape with our dry springs and creeks, our trees that are turning brown and losing leaves, and our well levels that are dropping. But if there's a silver lining in all of this, it's that when it comes to Texas and water, this time drought is when things get done. And we have a few examples of that. Like in the 1950s, we saw the creation of the Water Development Board after the drought of record. After the 2011 drought, the SWIFT Fund was created, which is a lot of financing for water projects in the state water plan. So drought can be a driver for change, and this drought is no different. We are so lucky that today we have an amazing panel of speakers to come talk to us about the many different changes that have come with this drought. And so I ask you to help me in welcoming them up to the stage. I know. But I have to share. No, all good. All right. Are you all okay sharing the mic? Okay. Well, I'd love to start with looking at some of the changes that we've seen at the state level, starting with you, Chairman King. Thank you for being here today. I know that this was a historic legislative session, including the creation of the Texas Water Caucus. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is and why you think it formed this session?
Well, thank you for inviting me. First of all, I've never been out to this event. I may have been to this event, but not at this venue. And so I'm not sure if I have or not, but it's an honor to be here with all of you. And I see a lot of folks that have done a lot on water over the years. So for several years now, there's been discussion about doing a water caucus because a lot of groups have their own caucuses. You've got the rural caucus and you've got the urban caucus and you've got all kinds of different caucuses and members of the legislature that go together that are interested in certain types of topics. And so they try to band together not only for effectiveness politically, but also for knowledge-based programs that are going to where they bring in folks and they tell them everything. So anyway, there'd been some discussion about the water caucus in past years. Some of the folks that were involved with water were a little reluctant to do it because they kind of figured the committee was the water caucus. And but I knew that when you look around the legislature, the people that have worked with water, a lot of them were getting older and retiring, and there wasn't that big a pool. And the water committee, the Natural Resources Committee, is also always been one of those committees where people tend to get on it and they tend to stay on it, so you don't have a lot of turnover. So anyway, for those reasons, we thought it'd be good to try to build up a new bench, so to speak, of folks, and plus we had the Water Foundation and other groups that were very, very serious about wanting to put the thing together and fund it, and that was a big thing. So I made a decision to go ahead and do it, and they asked me to be the chairman the first year at least so that we could get it kicked off, and it was a remarkable success. We had some great programs and ended up I think we had 75 members or something like that before it was all said and done out of 150 members of the Texas House. So that was sort of the genesis of and the reason that we formed the Water Caucus.
And the Water Caucus was a big part of moving forward Senate Bill 28, which is going to put together the Texas Water Fund, and if it passes in November, will mean $1 billion for water infrastructure. So can you tell us a bit more about that and what led to the creation of that fund?
So that was another reason. I'm glad you brought that up. I suspected that we were going to have a pretty big water session in terms of legislation. We knew that because the need was there, and we'd been talking about it, and infrastructure needs and water supply needs for the last year during the interim Plus, we knew that we were going to have a budget surplus. So, you know, if you're going to try to get the voters to bite off on expenditure, you want to do it when you have a surplus. And so that was another reason we formed the Water Caucus, to help us move Senate Bill 28 and SJR 75 through the process. And it was a big help, because the folks in the Water Caucus were instrumentally involved in the passage of Senate Bill 28 and the discussions that we had about, you know, whether it should be more infrastructure or more new water and those types of things. And that was really the big argument. The arguments that we had never were whether we should do it or not. It was just how much of the money should go in one place and how much should go in other areas, and how much money. So the House passed a bill. They passed the, we call it the JR, the SJR, which is ultimately turns into the proposition that you vote on, which will be Prop 6 on November the 7th. But the House passed it out with $3 billion in it. And so we put that amount of money in there, and then if the voters approved it, well, then that would force the hand of the Water Development Board in the state, you know, to make sure they allocated that much money. And the appropriators also in the Appropriations Committee. Ultimately, you know, there's the agreement that was struck because the Senate wouldn't go along with $3 billion, so we ended up with $1 billion, which is a good down payment on what is a huge need when you look forward over the next 30 or 40 years.
Thank you. Now let's look a little bit at stuff on the local level. Here we have the general manager of the Bandera River Authority and Groundwater District, Dave Mauk. In the last year during the drought, you all raised minimum lot sizes for new exempt wells to 10 acres, which was the highest we had seen in the Hill Country. Can you tell us a little bit about what led to that decision and what the impacts have been of that?
Yes, how you all doing? Bandera County, like a lot of areas in Texas, especially in the Hill Country, has seen a lot of significant growth. And this is happening at a time of a very punishing drought. Now, one of the tools our district has to help manage the resource, besides looking at the aquifer levels, is also looking at the rainfall. And over the last 30 years, there's been a significant decrease in rainfall in Bandera County, especially the last 10 years. Now, this new growth is increasing groundwater production mainly in the Middle Trinity Aquifer through exempt individual domestic wells that are coming in. Now, the Middle Trinity Aquifer in Bandera County only gets about 3 to 4% recharge vertically from the surface. So when it rains there, only about 3 to 4% is potentially getting down into the aquifer. Also in Bandera County, we have the Lower Trinity Aquifer, but it needs to be noted, in Bandera, there is no known natural communication between the Middle and Lower Trinity. So when it rains on the surface, that Lower Trinity Aquifer is not getting directly recharged. And we've age dated that water. It's ancient. It's about 20,000 years old. So the city of Bandera, with other public water supplies, independently of the pumping in the Middle Trinity, are utilizing the Lower Trinity for their groundwater production. That is a mining situation and fundamentally may not be sustainable. One of the tools that Texas is giving groundwater conservation districts is the ability to regulate well spacing. So our district, seeing this increased growth, seeing the stress of the aquifer from the drought, seeing the overall trend of the rainfall going downward, decided that we had to do something about the well density. And we were at 5 acres per exempt domestic well. We went through our rulemaking process, got a lot of public support. We moved that up to 10 acres to try to get the well density down, to try to mitigate this increased pumping at a time where we're seeing less rainfall.
And there was something kind of interesting about that, and that's that you partnered with the county. And so can you talk a little bit about what that looked like?
Well, yes, as this growth happened, Bandera County in their subdivision platting rules has a water availability requirement. It's been there for a while. So any applicant that wants to come in and plat a subdivision has to have a PE or PG do a water availability study, basically looking at what the drawdowns potentially will be in the aquifer from 10 and 30 years at the site. Now, when those studies are done, the county has us take a look at them, and we render an opinion. It's not binding, but it carries a lot of weight. And as these subdivisions came in with the growth at 5 acres, it became very apparent that the predicted groundwater drops were not going to be sustainable. And these were outlined and predicted by the actual applicants' PGs. So we went down and gave that testimony that with these kind of drops in the aquifer, we would not be able to effectively manage the aquifer or achieve or manage our desired future conditions. And that was given the testimony in Commissioner's Court, and it was also told to the Commissioner's Court, and they knew it, that we are in a priority groundwater management area, PGMA, and that the state had already, decades ago, and maybe even last century, it's been a while, said that there is a potential problem in the hill country in that area for groundwater in the future. And now with the added growth, with the overall trends in rainfall and the way the aquifer is behaving, the commissioners took the step and went ahead and moved from 5 to 10 acres. And what this does is it shows in our area, our elected officials at my board, along with the elected officials of Bandera County, take their charge very seriously about managing with my board the aquifer, but also with the Commissioner's Court about any future growth, while also looking out for the property rights of the people already there that are affected by the pumping and the property rights of the applicant, because all those things have to be taken into consideration. Inevitably, if development or well permits are approved that are not, it's a bad word to even use anymore, sustainable, but are not viable, nobody benefits from that.
And so you all, the county followed your suit, basically, with trying to raise lot sizes and match your rules.
Yes, ma'am.
So, and I know Hays County has done similar things of partnering with the district, and Hays County has been all over the news. By the way, this is Commissioner Launshale. I failed at my one job to introduce the speakers. Commissioner Launshale of Hays County. You all have been seeing a lot of development. There's been a lot in the news about Jacob's Well going dry. Do you all, what sort of requirements do you have in place to make sure that there is enough water when the new development comes around?
Thank you all, and thanks for having me. Yeah, and we've been using water availability studies for a while now because of our location in the PGMA, as well as we have a 6-acre minimum lot size that was adopted prior to my time in the county, but close to 15 years ago now, probably. So we use those tools. I think what we're finding as more exempt wells are drilled, and that 6-acre lot size sort of creates a path of least resistance for that exempt well to be, if you got 6 or more acres, you're going to have an exempt well, that the number of those exempt wells is starting to add up to where it is a significant draw on the aquifer. And I think it could be as much as half between permitted wells and exempt wells in the county right now. So I think we all understand that if we can continue down this path, that we're going to find that it isn't sustainable anymore. And during this drought, you mentioned Jacob's Well, and so we have a very good measuring stick because you can go and look at it, and there's data and pictures of that well for many years, and it's not flowing. It's a very sad state. The county manages a park around that well and allows the public to swim in it, which we have not allowed swimming this entire season because there hasn't been water there. So it's important that the public can see these impacts. This isn't, for all of my hydrogeologist friends and engineers out there, this is something that the common redneck like me can go out there and take a look at and understand that something's different. And of course, we're not getting rain, but in 2011, it wasn't to this extent. And so to me, I think we have to use that visual, that visual data, which is to look at something that's not flowing. Cypress Creek is in bad shape. Blue Hole in Wimberley is in terrible shape. And so I think the awareness is there from the public. You mentioned Aqua, an investor-owned utility that provides water to a good number of households in the Wimberley Valley that severely overpumped their permits and is facing some severe fines from our district. That's brought a lot of public awareness and a whole nother reason for us to take a look at how we manage groundwater, not just through our conservation districts, but in conjunction with the counties, and also I think specifically in conjunction with how we do groundwater modeling and how our desired future conditions are developed and administered through our groundwater management areas, specifically our PGMAs. And I think that's really where the next level of work has to happen. I applaud the state and the work that was done on water availability to make that something that could be done everywhere and not just in these PGMAs. But I think the next step is really getting into the weeds on the data so that you have the information to make those very hard decisions, as have been mentioned, property rights of not just those that are applying or building homes, but also the property rights of all of those that have been here and rely on the water and have been using it for generations. And so that balance is so important. I think it's going to require just further investments in technology and data and modeling. The county has been participating with the Meadows Center at Texas State on a groundwater modeling project, something that counties probably don't traditionally do. But for us, we need to have the data so that we can make the right decisions along with our partners at the state and at our groundwater conservation districts.
Well, and another thing that y'all have been working on are the conservation guidelines, I think, out in the last year or so. I think that's a really interesting example for other counties. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, what those guidelines are and what led to their development.
Yeah, it's something we're real proud of. We're getting close to being able to what we would call the implementation phase of those guidelines when we take a look at all of our development regulations and update those. There's been significant changes in law since our development regulations were created, and we've sort of put Band-Aids on them. Now is the time to open those back up and go through that process. And these conservation subdivision guidelines will be incorporated into those and codified when we do that. But our hope was to find ways that we could incentivize developers to follow methods and practices that are more sustainable. And some of those are incentivizing the conservation of open space in their development. It could be through offering reduction in fees that they pay to the county in platting fees. We could go up the list all the way to where we may support public improvement districts for the construction of their infrastructure for their development if they set aside more than 50% of the developable space within the property that they're developing. And we see that as that's a financing advantage for them, lower interest rates. We have a PID in the county. It's been successful, and so we're a little bit comfortable with it. But so a broad range of incentives to try to get developers to set aside some open space. We see a lot of public interest in that, and that's the reason why we think we can be involved, not just in water supplies, but water quality, flood management, habitat for endangered species. We think it checks a lot of boxes for public interest to be involved in that. And then we also see the opportunity of those that are moving to the hill country, which, there's multiple of them moving here right now as we speak. I do believe that most of the people moving here value this place. They value nature, they value our culture, no matter where they're coming from, and I think we need to take advantage of that. I think they would be supportive of many of the measures that we talk about because they're coming here to experience this. And it's a place that people want to be. And so I think we have to take advantage of that, and I think we can create a market for sustainable development that people will want to live in places that were developed that way. And I don't think we'll have to force them to. I think they'll say that I want to be part of that type of a community because it's responsible and it pays respect to this place. It pays respect to our history and our culture and all of those that have been here for the years before.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So Sharlene Leurig, CEO of Texas Water Trade. Commissioner Shell just spoke about how the county is trying to influence development. You are working, I think, directly with developers through this project called Net Zero Water. Could you share what is that project?
So really happy to hear this conversation ranging from the reality that all of us are dealing with, which is we're all experiencing not just like a temporal deficit of water that comes from drought. Drought is a great wake-up call for all of us, especially people who are relatively new here. I moved back to Texas during the 2011 drought. And so for me, it was the first time that I got to know Austin and the Texas Hill Country was in the depths of the drought. But really what we're contending with, as Dave was describing, is a structural deficit, right? We've been systematically planning to deplete our groundwater resources. Most of our surface water resources come from water underground, particularly in dry times, and we have more and more times that are dry. And so net zero water is a way of helping us all, I think, shift the way we think about how you deal with with what otherwise is an intractable problem of population growth that drives increased water demand and declining water resources, whether by design through desired future conditions and the amount that's being pumped, or because of climate change and more sporadic rainfall and lower recharge, whatever the factors might be. The reality is that managing water the way that we have and that we continue to in most places, where we have a centralized water treatment plant, a centralized wastewater treatment plant, individual groundwater wells, and that's really the only opportunities that we have to provide water, is an artifact of the last century. It's not our technological limits or our economic limits for the century that we're in, and it's certainly not the century that we're headed toward. And all of us have to start planning not for the next 10 years for water, but for the next 50 or potentially even for the next 100. My first experience doing water planning in Texas was through the City of Austin's 100-year Water Forward Plan, which was created in response to that extreme drought that left our Highland Lakes, our sole source of water for the City of Austin, at a third capacity. One of the bedrocks of our plan was instead to look at the future of the built environment of Texas, our future Texas cities, our future Texas town centers, our future master planned communities, not just as sources of demand, but as sources of water themselves. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about what that means, because it's a little bit of a head scratcher. If you look at developments like plenty of them that are out here in Dripping Springs being kind of the mecca of rainwater harvesting in Texas, that's a great example of the historic way of capturing water at the surface of the built environment, at the roof, and then storing in a cistern and storing it in what's effectively a very small reservoir for when you have times in between rainfall. Well, now, the only growing source of water supply that we have in the state of Texas that's just happening by accident is air conditioning condensate. Every year, how many millions of square feet of climate-conditioned real estate do we add within the Texas Triangle, that area between Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, San Antonio, Houston? It's millions and millions of square feet of air-conditioned space. And we are just, by incident, pulling water out of the atmosphere. And the way that we manage that water is to put it into our sewer system. But, the sewer system is losing water through its pipes, just like our drinking water system loses water. So when we start to look at condensate, which is 10% of what UT Austin's campus relies on through their chiller facilities, when you start looking at rainwater and stormwater that you have to capture anyway to prevent erosion and degradation of the water quality of receiving streams, then when you start looking at the technological reality that you can capture water from sinks, you can even capture water in toilets and treat it in wastewater systems that are, can easily fit within the 4 spaces of an underground parking garage, you start to see actually we have inherently a diversified water portfolio that we have the opportunity to tap into in the state of Texas if only we would design buildings to do such a thing. It's easier said than done. It involves people looking differently at buildings, looking differently at how we price out water, thinking about the financial incentives. Austin is forcing development at a certain scale to do this for non-potable water. But in most places in Texas, we don't see, as a 501c3, the likelihood that many places are going to compel developers to do this. So we think the sorts of incentives that the commissioner is talking about are terribly important and actually are kind of natural from an economic standpoint because the cost of water itself, the cost of pipe, is spiraling upward, and even developers are starting to see that. So net zero water, how do you build without increasing your demand on your water supplies? Technically, it's possible. The question is, do we choose to build that reality?
So you mentioned incentives from the county. What else do you think it's going to take so that this becomes the new way that we build in Texas?
Well, I think part of it is price signals, right? We presented to the Texas Builders Association last year and heard from them that impact fees, that cost of connecting to an existing water or wastewater system, is one of their biggest challenges that they see in the state of Texas. They also shared that they see where the cost of water is highest is where impact fees are highest, which is maybe not surprising, but was a pretty interesting insight from my perspective. So I do think some of the natural economics may be moving us in that direction, but the reality is that the permitting is hard to understand. It's difficult to navigate. For developers, time is money, and so the harder it is, the longer it takes to get through a permitting process, the less likely that they're going to opt in. So alongside the intentional kind of financial incentives, cost sharing, other sorts of bonuses that might be offered, density bonuses or things like that, I think counties and municipal governments, starting to maybe even build their own buildings net zero. Every new school that is built should be built in that way. Think about, workforce housing, affordable housing, civic centers, anything that really has a public purpose should be built in this way and helps to illuminate the ways that permitting is difficult and the ways that we should be easing the permitting pathway. The last thing I'll say is whether it's this form of water infrastructure, that kind of small scale, or if it's our centralized water treatment plants and wastewater treatment plants, which we will need. This isn't an either or, this is an all together. We have a looming workforce crisis. Right now in the state of Texas, we have one licensed water operator for every water system in the state. There's 7,000 water systems, 7,000 licensed water operators. Half of that workforce will retire in the next 10 years. And so it will be harder and harder for communities to find the workforce for our centralized systems. Now you start building a water system in every large building that requires a water operator. You start to see the ways that we need to be recommitting to bringing people into the water workforce as a meaningful career pathway.
Thank you, Sharlene. So we've heard about net zero buildings, we've heard about conservation development guidelines to encourage more sustainable development, a huge investment in water infrastructure, and then increasing minimum lot sizes in partnership with the county. Those are all, I think, a great step towards water resilience, but what else do you all think needs to happen to ensure that our water supplies are resilient and that we have enough water for the environment? And I will give you the mic.
I was going to say, yeah.
We can share the microphone. So I think it's been covered here pretty well. I've long been an advocate of conservation as the next new water supply. We know that in the current infrastructure, that with the water loss, that we lose 572,000 acre feet a year, we believe, in faulty water systems. And so hopefully, if the voters will approve Prop 6, we'll be able to start working on trying to improve those systems. Most of those systems were built candidly after the post-World War II boom in the previous century, as she was saying, and they were designed given the technology those days, and they're just old. And so, and there hasn't been a lot of incentive for people to improve them, candidly, because water has been relatively inexpensive for the last 70 or 80 years, and so they haven't had a lot of incentive to improve them. But so I think that improvement, at least that was our goal with the Senate Bill 28, was to improve the water systems. The 572,000 acre feet of water is a total water demand in 2020 for the city of Austin, Fort Worth, El Paso, Laredo, and Lubbock combined. And it can be done. You just have to have a lot of motivation. The economics of water is the main issue. Developers are going to go for the least expensive source of water to keep the price of their lots and their homes down. A lot of cities are going to talk a good game, but you got to realize that the sales of water is one of their main profit centers and generation. So, in order to pave streets and take care of their constituents' needs. And so those are the conflicting factors that are going on there. But it can be done. I was in Israel recently, about this time last year, I guess, and I don't remember the exact number, but they reuse something like 98% of their water. Whoa. It has 5 different uses, and it's taught from grade school that this is, and the last use is agricultural application. And of course, in Israel, you don't have private ownership of underground water, and they don't have a lot of underground water. You don't have private ownership of water, period, to speak of. And so it's a different dynamic from an ownership standpoint. But I think we can get there, but the thing that scares me is that human nature being what human nature is, people are not going to get real serious about rainwater collection systems and zero-type systems until they're turning on the faucet and there's no water coming out. So.
Thank you, by the way, for highlighting the opportunity to increase supply by reducing water loss. And I just want to give a shout out to the Hidden Reservoirs report that National Wildlife Federation put together that I think contained that statistic. If you all are all interested in water loss statistics, that's a great reference. Dave or y'all have any?
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of started this session with trying to take advantage of an opportunity, and sometimes when we're faced with great challenges that are negative, it gets us down, and we start seeing the doom and gloom. Maybe we should take this as an opportunity, like we've discussed. We have the attention of the public, I think, like never before here, especially in the Hill Country. You know, as the chairman mentioned, I mean, I think the drought has provided that reality to our constituents, that this isn't a bunch of scientists just up here talking about things with different interests. This is real. They can see it. They can feel it. And again, to take advantage of that opportunity of those that are coming here, that I believe they want to be here because of what we have to offer. Let's use that and let them help us protect it. And I think that maybe for the first time, or the first time in a while, we, instead of having that rural versus suburban or rural versus urban attitude, we can actually kind of come together and all share in one basic idea that we want to conserve and preserve the whole country in our case, and do everything we can so that when we're not here, those of us that come after us, we'll see what we did as positive. And so I think we've got a really good opportunity. Let's take advantage of it, and let's continue to develop. Like I mentioned early, science I think is going to be a key. It's a hard thing to understand, even for smart people. So let's do the most that we can, and let's use the dollars the state's going to provide to do smart things and to develop sustainable solutions.
Dave, what about you? What do you think?
Well, I'll kind of just make a statement about this. Historically, droughts in this area have been broken by flash floods. And probably the next one will be broken by, this particular drought will probably be broken by a flash flood again. And that's a contact sport up here. And it's probably going to happen. The problem is when that does happen, we get a few wet years. And everybody forgets about this. And it happened after 2011, at least down where I am. We have to realize we're in a perpetual area of drought. And once it breaks, it will come back, and we can't lose sight of that. We have to continue to conserve even when we get rainfall. And I think that's very important for this area. That's the reality we live in.
Thanks, Dave. And I mean, how do we do that? How do we, like you said, we're going to probably get rain in the spring, but how do we keep this mindset of change and innovation and making things better when we're no longer in a drought year? Do y'all have any ideas?
I mean, I just make it natural, make it by habit. You know, I always remember when I was in grade school and they talked about seat belts, and my dad picked me up from school and our truck didn't even have seat belts in it. And I looked at him and was like, I'm supposed to be wearing a seatbelt. And he was like, I don't know what happened to the seatbelts in this truck. It was 1969 F-350. So, that's become a habit to us, right? I mean, it's a habit to me. If I'm changing parking spots at HEB, I put my seatbelt on just because it's a habit. It's just the way we do things. So I think we just have to make ourselves look at that as a habit, that yes, there is an impetus on doing something right now because we have drought. We know it's going to rain. We know it's going to flood. But let's program that into ourselves, and then take advantage of that science and educate future generations so that they understand. Let's look a little bit farther forward. We have the opportunity to do that. We have the science and the data that allows us to do that. Let's use it to our benefit and just make this something that we do naturally.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's why we have groups, advocacy, I can't pronounce that word. Groups like the Hill Country Alliance, Texas Water Foundation, Texas Alliance of Groundwater Districts, different groups out there that remind people of the drought and the need to conserve. Those groups can also drive that narrative.
Thanks, Dave. All right, so we are going to turn it over for questions in a little bit, but I'm wondering any kind of closing thoughts on, on the future of water for our audience here. Sharlene.
Yeah, I'll offer. I think I would like to see a lot more emerging around regional water facilities being designed and built. And so what does that look like? It might look like larger wastewater treatment systems. We've got an enormous amount of water that is already or soon to be imported from aquifers to our east into areas in the hill country. We are all in some way kind of involved in the existential question of what happens with those wastewater return flows, and a lot of very important, serious conversations around direct discharge. We heard Diane earlier talking about the implications of direct discharge to ephemeral creeks and streams when you don't have the proper level of treatment. We need to be thinking about the solutions that really can't be achieved by individual communities of the scale of a small Texas Hill Country town, or even a county necessarily. River authorities for many years played that function. We've seen them moving from surface water management systems to groundwater development projects. I would love to see more sustainable water projects that are really designed not to move water from one user group to another and pretend like it's new water, but actually projects that make sustainable water that do increase total water that's available to our growing population across the state. And so I think that that's a role for chambers of commerce, for elected officials at various places within our states, halls of government. And we really do need to see more people taking on that sort of leadership, because of a lot of what we need to build in terms of human capacity and institutional capacity to build the things we need to manage water, they don't exist today. We have to create those human institutions and do some human and institutional engineering first.
Thanks, Sharlene. Any other thoughts? No? Okay, well, before we turn to questions, vote for Prop 6 in November, $1 billion for water infrastructure, and thank you all. Thank you to our panelists.
Anybody have any questions?
Correct me if I'm mistaken, but this is a few questions wrapped up in one. But is it still the case that San Antonio water system is trying to pump water from Lee and Fayette County for their water needs? And in that case, it seems there's like pressure for the onus to be put on consumers and individuals for things that are caused by larger entities such as corporations and militaries. And so in that context, what can we do when it's an entity so much larger out of our control?
What can we do about the big kind of corporate water projects that are piping water from other parts as individuals and consumers?
What type of project would you be referring to? Are you talking about some of the big high-tech firms that are coming in that use a lot of water? Are you talking about SeaWorld or?
Sure, there's that. But just say, why should it be Lee and Fayette County's populations, own us to conserve their water when it's San Antonio's misuse of water that they're having to pump water from Lee and Fayette County to San Antonio?
I'm happy to jump in. I mean, the Vista Ridge project was the first large water export project from the Carrizo-Wilcox Aquifer to west of I-35 and just east of I-35. It's already in production. There are numerous other large export projects that are permitted or in the process of seeking permitting. That was part of my comment around river authorities, now moving into more groundwater permitting for large-scale export projects. So it is not only San Antonio, but it's an important question because it's about, are we developing water that provides water for wealthier urban populations that have the power to purchase? but that might strand rural communities who don't have the ability to keep that water on site. And I mean, this is one of the most potent political conversations of our generation as it relates to water planning in Texas. What can you do about it? Get engaged even at the local level, depending upon where you live. If you're in a community that may be looking for additional water resources, they will likely start looking at import water because it is easier to develop a large-scale project like that than it is to do a lot of the other things that we were talking about. So you can get engaged in local water planning, you can talk with your local elected officials, share with them the future that you would like to see and how you would like to see your community sourcing their water and what impact you think is acceptable for other neighboring communities and for the environment as well, is my suggestion.
Yeah. So I realize you're talking about those large export projects, and so obviously the Vista Ridge program was one of the very first ones that was a large-scale export project, and we had an interim study last session on this very issue of what the effect of large-scale export projects are, and we did that because Vista Ridge had been operating long enough, and there's some others also around the state, but one of the things that we did do from a legal standpoint, from a legislative standpoint, is we created in statute the ability for them to charge export fees, and those export fees could then be used to mitigate the losses on the small communities and the small landowners. In other words, when they had to go and lower their pumps or drill new wells because there's a large-scale export project next to them, that doesn't stop people from doing export projects, but at least it recognizes that they're going to take place, as she said, and you try to help the people that are getting hurt by them. And that sounds like an easy thing, and you wonder, why do you have to have a piece of legislation to do that? And it's because the Constitution does not allow us to give her money to use for her private water well. It's taxpayer money to her is not something, so we have to create a piece of statute that says that they can charge an export fee, and those export fees can use to mitigate damages on a private water well in a neighboring county or somebody right there that's damaged by it. Now, if you want to stop the export projects, of course, some of them have been stopped because the local landowners and people were so opposed to it, they just made it so dadgum hard for the people to acquire the water rights that they just gave up. You know, it's kind of like the same strategy they use when somebody wants to put in a landfill or something like that. You know, you sue them into submission and you just make it so difficult for them. But when you get a big operator that's well organized like that one was, and like some of the others are, you just have to recognize it under the law currently in the state of Texas, and we don't have to like it, but you have the right to capture, and it's a property right state. And so if you're going to stop those exports from a legal standpoint and their ability to do that, you got to change the laws in the state of Texas.
All righty, that concludes this session.